Why were they laughing? She didn't even look up at first. The sound of muffled chuckles had become background noise to her, like the hum of fluorescent lights above the range. It wasn't new. It wasn't special. It was predictable. Staff Sergeant Evelyn Jackson had walked into too many rooms like this before. Same posture, same eyes, same assumptions. To them, she was just another support NCO, maybe admin or logistics, someone who didn't belong on the line with an M24 sniper rifle in her hands. But she didn't correct them, not yet. Evelyn adjusted the sling across her shoulder, the cold metal pressing against her palm. The rifle's weight was familiar, grounding, 12 pounds fully loaded. Some called it heavy, she called it home. A recruit, tall, broad, loud, grinned from the firing line. "Ma'am," he said, voice full of casual mockery, "you sure you can handle that thing? M24's got a kick that'll knock you flat." Laughter followed, cheap and nervous, the kind that fills the gaps between ignorance and insecurity. Evelyn didn't respond. She learned long ago that silence had power, more than any sharp comeback ever could. The young range officer, Sergeant Martinez, looked uneasy. He was new to the base, new enough to still be figuring out who was who. The clipboard in his hand trembled slightly as he tried to manage the energy in the room. Staff Sergeant Jackson's here to run your evaluation, gentlemen," he said. 12 shooters qualification on long-range course. Standard procedure." Evelyn nodded once, moving down the line, her boots crunching against spent casings scattered on concrete. She examined each rifle like a surgeon inspecting tools before an operation. Eyes sharp, movements exact. "Man, she's serious," one recruit whispered under his breath. "She looks like admin," another muttered back. "Probably never even fired that thing outside a range." Evelyn ignored them. She'd been called worse. In Iraq, they'd called her the Ghost, not for her silence, but for her precision. Targets dropped before anyone heard the shot. Her spotter had said once, "You shoot like you're erasing something, not killing it." Maybe he was right. Maybe part of her liked that idea, erasing threats, not people. She placed the rifle on the bench and checked the bolt. Smooth, clean, factory perfect. Whoever prepped this weapon knew their job. "Maybe stick with the M4, ma'am," came another voice. "That trigger pull, a solid 7 pounds, needs some grip strength." She finally looked up. Calm green eyes met his smirking ones. "Thank you for the concern, Private," she said evenly. "I'll manage." The recruits snickered again. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly guess, was that she'd made that same rifle sing through windstorms in Helmand Province, through sand that jammed bolts and turned scopes cloudy, through nights so dark the horizon disappeared. But none of that mattered here. Here, she was just a woman with a rifle. And they'd made up their minds before she ever pulled the trigger. Martinez cleared his throat. "Ma'am, ready to start the demonstration." "Ready." The firing range was silent except for the faint whistle of wind cutting across the open field. Targets stood 300, 600, and 800 meters away, white silhouettes waiting to be claimed. Evelyn crouched into position. The recruits gathered behind, arms folded, confident smirks plastered on their faces. 300 meters first, Martinez announced. She took a breath. Inhale, hold, exhale halfway. Her finger brushed the trigger and the world narrowed, sound fading, time slowing. The rifle kicked once, steady, controlled. Crack! A puff of dust blossomed dead center on the 300-meter target. No reaction from her, no pride, no surprise, just a small nod as though confirming a math problem she'd already solved. "Lucky shot," someone muttered. 600 meters next. Wind 8 miles an hour from the east, temperature drop of 4 degrees, humidity rising, bullet drift about 7 inches at that range. She made her adjustments without thinking. Click, click. Crack. The second target jolted, Another perfect center hit. Now the recruits were quieter. Even the confident one, Cooper, his name tag read shifted slightly, the grin slipping from his face. Evelyn didn't look up. She simply adjusted the scope again. 800 meters, long-range territory, the kind that separates shooters from snipers. Wind changed, just enough. She watched the flags, the shimmer of heat off the barrel, the faint vibration through her gloves. She waited for the moment, the stillness between heartbeats. Crack! The spotting scope confirmed what they all already knew. Center, again. No one laughed now. Evelyn rose smoothly, locked the bolt open, and set the rifle down with precision. 3 rounds, 3 hits, she said softly. Now your turn. For the next hour, the recruits took their shots, missed more than they hit. The best among them, Cooper, barely managed to tag the 600-meter plate. None came close to the 8. And yet she didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She just recorded the scores, her face neutral. When the last recruit lowered his rifle, sweat streaking his temple, the sound of boots echoed from the far end of the range. 2 officers stepped in. Every soldier on the line straightened instinctively. Colonel Marcus Blake, base commander, and beside him, General Robert Morrison, a legend in military circles, the man who'd written half the Army's sniper doctrine. "Carry on," Blake said, his voice firm. Then he spotted Evelyn. "Sergeant Jackson, you running the evaluation?" "Yes, sir," she replied. The general stepped forward, glancing through the spotting scope. 3 perfect center hits lined up like punctuation marks on white. He raised his eyebrows. "Who's shooting?" "Mine, sir." Morrison's gaze lifted to her face, then drifted to the 12 silent recruits standing behind her. "Did you gentlemen know who you were shooting against?" No one spoke. Cooper swallowed hard. "Sir, we were just doing qualifications, sir." "With Sergeant Jackson," Morrison corrected. "And did she introduce herself properly?" "She said she was evaluating us, sir." The general nodded slowly. Then he smiled, a small, almost proud curve of his lips. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Staff Sergeant Evelyn Jackson, the best sniper I've commanded in 30 years. The words hit like artillery. "You mocked her for picking up an M24, Morrison continued, his tone still calm but sharp enough to cut steel. "You suggested she didn't have the experience. What you failed to realize is that she holds every long-range record on this base, some standing for nearly a decade. 47 confirmed kills, 3 deployments, 2-time international sniper champion, instructor to Rangers, SEALs, and Delta." The recruits' faces went pale. Cooper's throat bobbed. He stared at the rifle she just laid down, as if it now carried weight he hadn't felt before. Morrison stepped closer to Evelyn. "I came here to observe her methods because her results speak for themselves. Half the snipers operating in special forces today learned under her, or under those she trained." He paused. "So when you told her to let one of you demonstrate proper technique," the general chuckled softly, "you might as well have told Michael Jordan how to dribble." Silence. Even Martinez looked stunned, realizing he'd been standing beside a legend all morning without knowing it. Evelyn said nothing. She stood quietly, hands clasped behind her back, eyes on the far targets as if this was just another day. Because to her it was. Blake folded his arms. "Sergeant Jackson doesn't advertise her credentials. She believes in proving skill, not listing it. But I think you've seen enough to understand what that means." Evelyn finally spoke. "They're good recruits, sir, overconfident, but that's common." Morrison nodded. "Then teach them. They need a lesson only you can give." She didn't smile, but her eyes, those calm green eyes, softened slightly. "Yes, sir." For the next 3 hours, the range became a classroom. Evelyn's voice carried across the dust and wind, explaining how heat changes bullet trajectory, how humidity shifts the 0 point, how the rhythm of breath can decide between a miss and a kill. She taught not like a performer but like a craftsman, each motion deliberate, each explanation patient. The recruits listened, every trace of arrogance burned away. Cooper asked the question first. "Ma'am, how did you get this good?" She considered before answering, "By never assuming I was." He frowned slightly. "I practiced until I couldn't miss," she said quietly. "And when people laughed like today, I practiced harder. Most shooters stop when they hit the target once. Professionals keep going until they can hit the same point 100 times under any condition. The difference isn't strength, it's discipline." Another recruit asked, "Do people still underestimate you, even with your record?" "All the time," she said, "but now I let the results speak." Morrison watched from behind, arms crossed, a rare expression of respect softening his stern face. "That," he said to Colonel Blake, "is exactly why she's rewriting our sniper program." By the time the session ended, the recruits were changed. The laughter was gone, replaced by something else: respect, and a quiet shame that cut deeper than any punishment could. As they left, Cooper stopped at her side. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, "I owe you an apology. You're the best shooter I've ever seen." Evelyn nodded once. "Then remember this, never assume someone's skill by how they look. Let performance speak, always." He nodded, eyes firm. "Yes, ma'am." When the recruits finally cleared the range, Morrison turned to her. "We need to talk about your next assignment." Evelyn removed her ear protection, her hair slightly disheveled, face calm. "Yes, sir." "I want you at Fort Benning," he said. "Lead instructor for the new sniper program. You'll be shaping the next generation, across all branches." She hesitated. "Sir, I've had offers like that before. They don't always end well. Some people still resist." "I know," Morrison said softly, "and that's exactly why we need you." Evelyn glanced back at the now empty range. The echoes of laughter still lingered faintly in her memory, but so did the silence that followed it. She nodded, "All right, but one condition." Morrison tilted his head. "Name it." "Anyone who doubts because of who I am gets the same lesson those recruits got today." Morrison smiled. "Wouldn't have it any other way." The sun was beginning to set behind the berm. Evelyn packed the rifle back into its case, steady hands, precise movements. For a moment, she paused, staring down at the weapon that had carried her through war zones and training fields alike. A faint breeze swept past, carrying the scent of gunpowder and dust. She whispered, almost to herself, "It's never about the rifle." Then she turned, walking toward the officers waiting by the gate. Her boots crunched on gravel, measured, unhurried, certain. The day had begun with mockery. It ended with silence. And sometimes, silence is the loudest sound on earth. Because dignity doesn't shout. It simply acts. Why did she hesitate outside that classroom door? Maybe because it wasn't a battlefield, but it felt like one. Fort Benning, the center of American marksmanship training. Home to the best and the most skeptical. The metal placard on the door read, "Advanced Sniper Instructor Course Lead, SFC E. Jackson." Her name. And for many in that room, a surprise. Inside, 30 faces waited. Marines, Rangers, SEALs, Air Force marksmen, all of them veterans of at least one combat deployment. They were here to be shaped into something sharper, deadlier, more precise. Evelyn straightened her collar, exhaled once and stepped in. The conversation stopped, chairs squeaked. Every eye turned toward her. Some watched with curiosity, some with respect, and a few with disbelief. She recognized it instantly, the same flicker she'd seen on the range, in briefing rooms, on deployments. That split-second judgment that said, "You don't belong here." Evelyn set her folder on the instructor's desk. "Good morning." Her voice was calm, not loud, not commanding, but it carried. "My name is Sergeant First Class Evelyn Jackson. I'll be your lead instructor for the next 12 weeks." A few brows rose. One Marine in the front row, a broad-shouldered staff sergeant, exchanged glances with the man beside him. Evelyn noticed. She didn't call it out, not yet. "You're here because you've already proven yourselves as exceptional shooters," she continued. "But being a sniper isn't about hitting targets. It's about never missing." Silence. She let the words hang there for a moment before adding, "By the time this course is over, you'll understand the difference." The Marine raised a hand. "Ma'am, no disrespect," he said carefully, "but most of us come from operational units. What makes you qualified to teach us?" Evelyn didn't flinch. "That's a fair question," she said. "I have 11 years of sniper experience, 3 combat deployments, 47 confirmed kills, and I've trained over 200 special operations snipers. But credentials aren't the point." She paused, looking at them each in turn. "Your improvement is. At the end of this course, you'll shoot better than you do now, or I failed as an instructor. Judge me by that." A few of the skeptical faces softened. Not all, but a few. "Any questions?" she asked. No one spoke. "Good," she said. "Let's get to work." The first week broke them. They'd expected marksmanship drills, lectures on wind calls, maybe some field exercises. What they got was physics. Ballistics tables, heat signatures, muzzle velocity decay curves, humidity compensation. Some of the Marines looked like they'd wandered into a graduate science course. One muttered under his breath, "Didn't sign up for a weather seminar." Evelyn heard it. She just smiled faintly. "The bullet listens to the weather, Sergeant," she said. "If you don't, it won't listen to you." By day 3, they were calculating bullet drift on notepads, adjusting for elevation, temperature, and density altitude before they even lifted a rifle. Evelyn moved through the line like a shadow, soft-spoken, observant. She corrected posture, breathing rhythm, even heartbeat timing. Her tone never rose, but when she spoke, they listened. "Don't fight the rifle," she told one recruit struggling with recoil control. "Let it breathe with you. Precision isn't strength, it's rhythm." That line stuck. It echoed through the training bay for weeks afterward. By week 2, they were shooting at 1,000 meters. Wind gusts swept across the range, unpredictable and cruel. Even the experienced shooters were missing by inches, sometimes feet. Evelyn stood behind them, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "Slow down," she told one. "You're chasing your bullet instead of leading it." He looked confused. "Ma'am, you're reacting to the shot instead of predicting the outcome. Think ahead. The wind shifts before you fire. Read it, don't fight it." She lay down beside him, her own rifle beside his. She didn't adjust much. Just a tiny scope correction, one deep breath, then crack. The target at 1,000 meters rang, dead center. The Marine blinked. "How?" She interrupted softly. "You were close. You just didn't trust your math." By the end of that session, even the skeptics started writing down her corrections. It wasn't about ego for her. It never had been. Evelyn didn't care about being the best anymore. She cared about what came after, the student who'd take that knowledge forward, the one who'd never again underestimate a quiet voice at the range. Still, there were moments. Late at night, in the armory when the others were gone, she'd sit alone with the rifles. The smell of gun oil and powder lingered like ghosts of old deployments. She'd clean the barrel with the same ritual precision she always had. Left hand steady, right hand slow. Every pass of the brush was a memory. A rooftop in Kandahar. A valley outside Ramadi. A sandstorm that nearly buried her scope. Those places never really left. Sometimes she'd stop mid-cleaning, hand frozen, staring into nothing. Her breathing would hitch for just a second before she steadied herself again. No one saw that side of her. They saw calm professionalism, unwavering discipline. They didn't see the quiet moments where ghosts whispered through the walls. By week 5, something shifted. The Marine Staff Sergeant, the same one who'd questioned her on day one, stayed behind after training. "Ma'am," he said, "I owe you some honesty. I wasn't sure how this would go. Never had a female instructor for anything combat-related, but you're the best teacher I've ever had." Evelyn studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I appreciate that, but the credit's mutual. You came here skeptical. You stayed open. That's rare." He hesitated, then asked, "How do you deal with it? The constant need to prove yourself?" She thought for a long moment before answering. "At first it bothered me," she admitted. "Every time someone laughed or doubted, I felt like I had to earn my place again. Then I realized something. Their opinions weren't my responsibility. My results were." She leaned against the bench, arms folded. "You don't silence doubt by arguing. You silence it by performing so consistently that words lose their power." He nodded slowly. "Guess that applies outside the range, too." "It does," she said, "everywhere." Weeks blurred together, long days of shooting, theory, and fatigue. Under her guidance, they learned things they didn't even know they didn't know. How mirage distortion shifts the target line. How elevation changes humidity density. How your pulse, if uncontrolled, moves your point of aim by millimeters that become meters downrange. And still, she demonstrated every technique herself. When she taught rapid acquisition, she hit 5 targets in 12 seconds. When she demonstrated shooting from unstable positions, she leaned over a rusted truck hood, fired, and tagged a half-buried plate at 700 meters. The class erupted in disbelief. She only smiled faintly. "Now it's your turn." By week 9, something miraculous had happened. The room that once greeted her with smirks now watched her with awe. No one saw a female instructor anymore. They saw a professional, a sniper, a leader. And that transformation, the quiet rewiring of perception, was worth every bullet, every breath, every stare she'd ever endured. Week 12, final qualification. 30 shooters, 30 rifles, 1,000 meters. Wind 14 mph crosswind, variable gusts. The test was brutal by design. Evelyn stood behind them, silent, her eyes tracking each shot through the spotting scope. One by one, the targets dropped. One by one, confidence grew. When the last rifle fired, the data told the story. Average effective range increased by 200 meters. Accuracy improved by 40%. Every student passed. Evelyn allowed herself a rare smile. General Morrison arrived that afternoon, watching their last shots from a distance. When it ended, he approached her quietly. "I've seen sniper training for 3 decades," he said. "This is the best performing class I've ever witnessed." Evelyn looked out across the field. "They worked hard for it." "You gave them more than skill," Morrison said. "You gave them perspective." She didn't respond immediately. Then softly, "Sir, I just taught them what someone once tried to teach me. Don't define yourself by what others doubt. Define yourself by what you do when they doubt you." The general nodded. "Well said." That night, as she sat alone under the range tower lights, Evelyn found herself thinking back to that first day. The laughter, the condescension, the sound of disbelief. It all seemed distant now. Her students weren't laughing. They were teaching, passing her lessons on. Maybe that's what legacy really was, not medals or records, but the quiet continuation of belief, carried by those who once doubted. She smiled faintly, resting a hand on the M24 beside her. The same rifle that started everything. The same rifle that had silenced countless words without ever speaking once. In the end, that was her truth. You don't change the world by shouting louder. You change it by shooting straighter. And the bullet, she knew, never cared who fired it, only that it hit exactly where it was meant to. How does a legend begin? Not with glory, not with applause, but with resistance. 3 months later, Evelyn Jackson stood before a briefing room filled with uniforms, men and women wearing decades of service, medals that gleamed like verdicts. She was there to present the framework for the new Army-wide sniper doctrine. Her doctrine. The air was heavy, with the scent of coffee and skepticism. She could read it in their posture, the slight lean back in chairs, the folded arms, the eyes that didn't quite meet hers. They weren't hostile, just unconvinced. Major Harlan, head of curriculum review, broke the silence first. "Sergeant First Class Jackson," he said, polite but pointed, "you're proposing significant changes to an established training system. This program, been in place for decades. Why fix what isn't broken?" Evelyn looked up from her notes. "Because it is broken," she said simply. A faint murmur rippled through the room. "Sir," she continued, "we've been training marksmen, not snipers. We focus on mechanical shooting instead of adaptive precision, on strength instead of consistency, on experience instead of understanding. That's why half our advanced trainees plateau before deployment." Her tone was calm, factual, no defensiveness, no bravado, just truth. Another officer leaned forward. "And your evidence for this?" Evelyn clicked the remote. A series of graphs appeared, data pulled from performance logs, training outcomes, and after-action reports. "These numbers aren't guesses," she said. "They're proof. My students across all branches improved average effective range by 200 meters. Accuracy increased by 40%. These are not anomalies, they're repeatable results." She paused, "but only when training focuses on fundamentals and mental control instead of physical attributes or rank bias." Silence again. She could almost hear the resistance softening, but not disappearing. Harlan nodded slowly. "Your results are impressive, but Sergeant, integrating your methodology across all services will require retraining instructors, many senior to you. How do you expect to gain their cooperation?" Evelyn met his gaze. "By earning it, sir, the same way I've earned it everywhere else, through performance." Her words landed like a shot, measured, precise, unflinching. That night, she sat alone in her office, reviewing notes under the glow of a single desk lamp. Stacks of files surrounded her, weather tables, ballistic charts, reports from ranges across the country. She'd been here before, not this room but this feeling. The quiet before another uphill climb. There was always another. She leaned back, eyes unfocused. Her reflection in the darkened window looked older than she remembered, 33 now, lines of fatigue tracing where laughter used to live. On her desk, a small framed photo faced her, 3 faces frozen in desert light. Her old sniper team, Alpha Group. One of them, Sergeant Dean Hawk Miller, had been her spotter in Afghanistan. He once told her, "You teach like you shoot, Ev, calm, quiet, but when it lands, nobody forgets." He died 2 months before the end of their 3rd tour. She reached out, brushed the dust from the frame, and whispered, "Still trying to make it count, Hawk." By the next morning, she had a new assignment order. Effective immediately. SFC Evelyn Jackson, Chief Doctrine Advisor, Advanced Marksmanship Division. She was no longer just an instructor. She was rewriting how the Army thought about precision shooting. And not everyone liked that. At the next training conference, one senior instructor, a Master Sergeant named Hill, cornered her after the meeting. "I've been teaching snipers for 15 years, he said, voice low but tense. "Now I'm supposed to follow a curriculum written by someone half my size and half my age." Evelyn didn't bristle. She'd heard versions of this her whole life. "Then you'll appreciate how hard it is to teach people who think they already know everything," she said evenly. Hill blinked. The edge in her tone wasn't anger, it was truth, wrapped in calm authority. "You're free to test my methods," she added. "If your shooters outperform mine under identical conditions, I'll scrap my approach. But if mine outperform yours—" He hesitated. "What?" She gave a faint smile. Then you start teaching it my way. The test happened 2 weeks later. 2 squads, same range, same wind conditions. Hill's students went first. Competent, confident, tight groupings at 600 meters. Then Evelyn's squad. Her students drawn from mixed backgrounds, adjusted scopes with clinical precision, called out crosswinds, and fired in near-perfect rhythm. Their spread was tighter, their reaction times faster, their shots cleaner. Hill didn't say a word. He just stared at the target sheets, jaw tight. Evelyn didn't gloat. She handed him the data sheets. "It's not about who's better," she said quietly. "It's about what works." He looked at her for a long moment before nodding once. "You've got something real here, Jackson." Over the following months, she traveled between bases. Camp Pendleton, Quantico, Fort Bragg, teaching, demonstrating, rewriting manuals. Everywhere she went, the same pattern repeated. Skepticism, silence, respect. But success came with a cost. The long days, the endless scrutiny, the constant need to prove not her skill, but her right to lead. Some nights, she'd collapse on her bunk, exhaustion pressing against her chest like body armor that wouldn't come off. Other nights, she'd lie awake replaying memories she couldn't silence. The shot that saved her team in Ramadi. The one that didn't. She'd seen the face of the target through her scope that day. Young, barely older than her recruits. A fraction of a second before she pulled the trigger, he'd looked right at her. She told herself it had been necessary. But necessary didn't mean easy. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, she wondered if that was why she trained so hard, to make sure others never had to face that same moment unprepared. Months turned to a year. Her program gained traction. Reports from field units confirmed improved accuracy and survivability among deployed snipers. The change wasn't just tactical, it was cultural. Instructors started judging shooters by consistency instead of strength. Students stopped asking who their instructor was and started asking what their instructor could do. For the first time in her career, Evelyn wasn't the outlier. She was the standard. Still, she refused to slow down. At every training site, she fired the first shot, not out of pride, but principle. You can't ask others to follow your aim if you don't take the shot yourself. Then came the interview. A documentary team from the Defense Media Office wanted to record a feature on the woman who rewrote the sniper rulebook. Evelyn hated the title. During the interview, the reporter, a young woman, earnest but nervous, asked, "Sergeant Jackson, how does it feel to be the first woman to lead sniper training across all branches?" Evelyn hesitated, then answered carefully. "I don't think of it that way," she said. "I'm not trying to be the first of anything. I'm trying to make sure no one else has to be." The reporter blinked. "What do you mean?" Evelyn leaned back slightly. "It means the next instructor shouldn't have to fight for credibility before they even fire a shot. It means the next woman shouldn't walk into a range and hear laughter before she's earned respect. My goal isn't to stand out. It's to make standing out unnecessary." The room fell quiet. Even the cameraman lowered his head slightly, as if understanding the weight behind her words. That evening, after the cameras were packed away, General Morrison found her at the range. He was older now, slower, but the sharpness in his eyes hadn't faded. "You did good today," he said. "I didn't do it for them," she replied. "I know," he said, "but it matters." They stood in silence for a while, watching the horizon burn orange in the fading light. "Do you ever miss it?" Morrison asked. "The field?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Every day." "Then why stay here?" She looked down at the rifle beside her. "Because someone has to make sure the ones who go don't die for avoidable mistakes." He nodded, understanding more than words could say. A few weeks later, orders came through again. Promotion approved. Master Sergeant Evelyn Jackson, Chief Marksmanship Instructor, United States Army. It was the highest non-commissioned position in sniper training. When the paperwork arrived, she stared at it for a long time. No celebration, no call home. Just quiet reflection. Because to her it wasn't an end, it was another beginning. She remembered the laughter on that first day, the M24, the recruits, the disbelief. 10 years later, she was rewriting doctrine for the entire force. But she never forgot how it started. Not with recognition, not with applause, but with doubt. And maybe that was the lesson all along. That sometimes, the world's most powerful transformations begin with someone being underestimated. As she walked the silent range that night, the stars above were bright, unblinking. She picked up the M24, set it on the bench, and chambered a single round. Not for training, not for record, for memory. Wind 6 mph cross, temperature 58 degrees F, distance 1,000 meters. She adjusted the scope, exhaled and fired. The steel plate rang faintly in the distance. A clean hit. Evelyn smiled, lowering the rifle. Still got it. She whispered into the wind, for everyone who laughed, for everyone who doubted. She paused. Thank you. Because without them, she might never have needed to prove anything. And proving it, again and again, was what made her unstoppable. What happens when your lessons outgrow you? When something you built begins moving faster than you can follow. Evelyn Jackson had never asked for fame, but now her name traveled through briefing rooms from Washington to Warsaw. Her doctrine, the Jackson method, was spreading across Allied forces, studied, translated, adapted. It was strange to hear her own name spoken like that. Jackson says compensate win by instinct. Jackson's discipline standard. Jackson grouping test. She built a system that turned precision into instinct, calm into survival. And in doing so, she changed the way armies thought about marksmanship. But change, she learned, always brings a shadow. It started one morning in Germany. She'd been sent to train NATO instructors, the kind of shooters who already thought they'd reached the peak. The range was cold, mist curling over grass like smoke. Evelyn stood before 20 instructors from 10 different countries. Some smiled politely, others crossed their arms. She began the session the same way she always did, quiet, calm, with a question. What's the most dangerous mistake a sniper can make? A British officer answered immediately, missing the shot. Evelyn nodded. No, the most dangerous mistake is firing too soon. A murmur ran through the group. Every bullet, she said softly, is a decision that can't be undone. Precision isn't about speed, it's about patience, about knowing when not to fire. Her translator repeated the words in 3 languages. The range went quiet. That lesson stayed with them. Later that day, one of the Polish instructors approached her privately. You speak about patience like it's a weapon, he said. It is, Evelyn replied. Sometimes restraint is the hardest trigger to pull. That night, she sat alone in the mess hall, long after the others had left. Her hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee gone cold. She thought about what she'd said and why it mattered. She'd seen too much of what impatience cost. There was one shot she could never forget, an Afghan rooftop, years ago. Her team had eyes on a possible insurgent moving between buildings. He'd carried a radio, no weapon visible. Her spotter had whispered, permission to engage. She'd hesitated, just long enough for the man to drop the radio and walk away. Minutes later, an explosion took down a patrol truck 2 blocks away. She made the wrong call, hesitation that cost lives. But later, she learned the truth. The radio carrier wasn't the trigger man. The real bomber was someone else, a child. That was the day she'd stopped believing in absolutes. In war, she'd realized, Being right and being human didn't always overlap. Weeks later, she was back in the States, Fort Benning again, her unofficial second home. Papers piled high on her desk, awards she never asked for stacked beside them. She was in the middle of rewriting an advanced field manual when a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." A corporal entered holding a sealed folder. "Delivery for you, ma'am," came through direct courier. She took it, signed, and waited until the door closed. The envelope bore a unit patch, 7th Recon, Arizona. Inside was a letter, handwritten. She froze when she saw the name. Cooper, the recruit who'd mocked her that day on the range, 10 years ago. Her eyes scanned the first line. "Ma'am, you probably don't remember me, but I remember everything about that day." She smiled faintly. Of course she remembered. The letter went on. "You made us run that obstacle course after we failed. I cursed every second of it, but the truth is I learned more in those hours than I did in years of training. I wanted to tell you something. I just finished my 3rd deployment. I used your breathing technique during a hostage rescue in Fallujah. It saved lives, not mine, theirs. I wanted you to know that your lesson didn't stop with us. We're teaching it forward." Evelyn's throat tightened. She leaned back, reading the last line twice. "You taught us to measure success not by ego, but by accuracy. Thank you for never raising your voice, only your standard." She folded the letter carefully, set it beside her rifle case, and exhaled. Sometimes, the echo of a single moment carries farther than any bullet. In the following months, her work expanded again. She began leading joint precision doctrine sessions, blending science, psychology, and field realism. For the first time, the curriculum didn't just train shooters, it trained thinkers. Her students studied weather models, light diffraction, even breathing rhythm mapped to heart rate. She introduced what she called consequence drills, where students reviewed real missions, analyzing not only their marksmanship, but their decision ethics. Some resisted at first. "Ma'am, we're shooters, not philosophers." She answered softly, "If you pull a trigger without philosophy, you're not a sniper, you're a weapon. And weapons don't think, people do." That line became a mantra in the new doctrine. But with every success came a heavier silence inside her. Because teaching precision meant reliving its cost. Every target board she pinned, every bullet she traced through air, reminded her of faces she'd never seen again. Teammates, trainees, even enemies. She'd given her life to perfecting control, but there were nights she wished she could unlearn it, just enough to feel something again. Once, late during a training rotation, one of her students, a young airman, found her sitting alone on the range after dark. "Ma'am," he asked gently, "you okay?" She looked up, smiled faintly. "Fine, just thinking." He hesitated. "You ever think about the ones you shot?" Her eyes flickered, but her voice stayed steady. "Every one." The young man looked uneasy. "How do you live with that?" Evelyn glanced at the rifle resting beside her. The scope reflected the faint moonlight. "You don't live with it," she said. "You live through it. You teach better so others don't repeat the same mistakes." He nodded slowly, realizing it wasn't a rehearsed answer. It was a wound wrapped in truth. Her next assignment took her to a desert training ground, a joint exercise with international special operations. Dozens of shooters from different flags. No ranks, no egos. Just skill. During the final trial, a crosswind of 20 miles per hour hit the field, the kind of wind that turned perfect shots into chaos. One of the German snipers cursed under his breath, shaking his head. Impossible conditions. Evelyn didn't respond. She stepped forward, adjusted the scope 2 clicks, and lay prone beside him. "Nothing's impossible," she murmured, "just miscalculated." Crack! The steel plate rang out across the dunes, a sound that sliced through disbelief. The crowd behind her went silent. Then applause broke, brief, respectful, controlled. She turned to the German sniper. "Now it's your turn." He smiled, picked up his rifle, and tried again. The shot hit, barely off-center. "That's better," she said. "Next time, trust the math." When the exercise ended, a French captain approached her with a handshake. "Your methods changed everything, Sergeant Jackson. Before, we measured by muscle. Now, we measure by mind." Evelyn shook his hand. "Good, because the battlefield doesn't care how strong you are, only how still you can be." That night, sitting alone on the flight back home, Evelyn opened her notebook, the same one she'd carried since her first deployment. Inside, she'd written something years ago, words from an old mentor she barely remembered. "A rifle is not a weapon, it's a mirror." She understood it now. Every shot reflected the shooter's mind, focus, patience, fear, doubt. Maybe that was why she dedicated her life to teaching calm, because calm wasn't just accuracy, it was survival. Not just on the battlefield, but inside yourself. Back home, she found another letter waiting on her desk, same handwriting as before. "Cooper again. Ma'am, you'll be happy to know I'm an instructor now. And yes, I make my students run the obstacle course too, every single one. I tell them about you, not the legend, the person. The one who stayed calm when we didn't. The one who never had to shout to command respect. We learned what leadership really looks like that day." She smiled, folded the letter, tucked it next to the first one. Her wall was covered in plaques, commendations, medals. But those two folded pieces of paper were the only things that ever truly felt like victory. That evening, she took her rifle case to the empty range. She opened it slowly, running her hand along the barrel. The M24, her old companion. She lay prone, aimed downrange, and whispered, "All right, old friend, one more time." The trigger broke like breath leaving the body. Crack! The plate at 1,200 meters rang clear, echoing across the valley. For a long time she stayed still, listening. The silence afterward felt familiar, not lonely but complete. Because silence was never emptiness for Evelyn Jackson. It was acknowledgement of everything she'd lost, everything she'd built, and everything still left to teach. Some people change history by force. She changed it by patience. And as she packed the rifle away, the last light of day catching on the steel, she whispered to herself, a quiet truth no one else could hear. Precision isn't about hitting the target. It's about becoming the kind of person who can. When does teaching stop being duty and start being guilt? That question began following Evelyn like a shadow. It started small, an order here, a briefing there. Then one morning, her inbox held a new directive stamped classified priority. She scanned the subject line. Operation Gideon, special training request. Her chest tightened. Gideon. She heard the whispers. A covert program rumored to develop long-range intervention units, snipers trained not just for battlefields, but for strategic eliminations. Assassinations. For the first time in years, she felt something colder than wind press against her throat. The meeting was held behind closed doors in a windowless conference room. General Morrison was there, older now, tired but still composed. Across from him sat men and women in civilian suits, government liaisons, intelligence officers, the kind who spoke softly but moved armies. "Sergeant Jackson," one of them began, voice smooth as glass, "your doctrine has proven remarkably effective. We want to adapt it for classified field operations." Evelyn kept her expression neutral. "What kind of operations?" "Precision counter-threat initiatives, high-value targets, non-traditional theaters." She knew the language, bureaucratic camouflage for sanctioned killing. "You want me to train assassins," she said quietly. The room went still. The civilian smiled politely. "We prefer precision intervention assets." Morrison shifted in his seat. "Evelyn, it's not what it sounds like." "With respect, sir," she interrupted, "it sounds exactly like what it is." The man in the suit folded his hands. "We're facing enemies who use chaos as strategy. Your methods could prevent wars before they start. A single bullet at the right time saves thousands." Evelyn exhaled slowly. "A single bullet also ends one life, and you're asking me to teach people how to do that without hesitation." "That's already what you do," another voice countered. "No," she said, her tone calm but cutting. "I teach soldiers how to think before they fire. That's what keeps us human." The silence that followed felt heavier than any reprimand. Morrison finally spoke. "You'll have time to review the proposal. No decision yet." But Evelyn already knew. Her answer wasn't about policy. It was about principle. That night she sat alone on the firing range, wind cold against her face. The stars above were sharp, distant. She opened her notebook, the same one she carried since Afghanistan. Flipped through pages of ballistic equations, diagrams, handwritten reflections. One line caught her eye, something she'd written years ago. "Control without conscience is just accuracy." She ran her fingers over the words, feeling their weight. Was that what she'd created? A system so perfect, so efficient, that someone else could twist it into a weapon for politics instead of protection. She thought about Cooper's letter, about the Marine who'd thanked her for teaching patience, about the young airman who'd asked how she lived with what she'd done. She thought about every student who'd left her course believing they carried not just a rifle, but responsibility. If she said yes to this, what kind of responsibility would that be? Days later, Morrison called her into his office. He didn't waste time. "Evelyn, they're pushing hard. The Pentagon's involved now. They want you leading the initial phase." She sat down quietly. "And you?" He hesitated. "I think it's dangerous ethically, politically, but I also know how much influence you have. If someone has to do it, I'd rather it be you. At least then it's done right." She looked at him for a long time. "That's how it always starts, sir, doing the wrong thing the right way." He sighed. "You think I haven't asked myself the same question?" Evelyn leaned forward, voice steady. "You taught me that leadership isn't about orders. It's about example. If we build this, we cross a line we can't uncross." Morrison nodded slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. "You're not wrong, but refusing could end your career." "Then so be it," she said. "If the price of staying in uniform is losing my conscience, I'll hang it up myself." For a moment neither spoke. The air between them hummed with respect and regret. Morrison finally said, "You remind me why I kept you around all these years." She smiled faintly. "To make your life harder." He chuckled. "Exactly." She didn't resign that day. Not yet. Instead, she did what she always did when words weren't enough, she taught. The next morning, she gathered her current class on the range. "Today," she said, "we're not shooting for score, we're shooting for restraint." The students looked puzzled. She set up a moving target that appeared and disappeared at unpredictable intervals. "Engage only when you can confirm with absolute certainty that it's hostile," she instructed. "You'll lose points for false engagements." The first shooter fired 3 times, 2 hits, 1 miss. Evelyn nodded. "And what if that third one wasn't an enemy? You'd have just created one." The lesson landed harder than any reprimand. By the end of the session, half the students had stopped firing altogether, waiting, thinking, choosing patience over impulse. That night she logged their results with quiet pride. If command wanted her to create machines, she'd give them thinkers instead. Weeks passed. The pressure from above didn't fade. They sent emails, then memos, then friendly reminders of obligation. Evelyn ignored them all. Finally, an official summons arrived. She was to appear before a board to explain her noncompliance. As she entered the room, she recognized every face. Commanders, bureaucrats, Morrison again forced into silence by politics. A colonel began. "Sergeant Jackson, your refusal to cooperate with Directive Gideon constitutes insubordination. Do you deny this?" "I don't deny it," she said evenly. "I disagree with it." "Your disagreement is irrelevant. Orders are orders." Evelyn met his eyes. "With respect, sir, orders without ethics aren't orders. They're instructions, and soldiers follow orders, not instructions." A murmur rippled through the panel. One officer leaned forward. "You're overstepping." Evelyn didn't blink. "No, sir. I'm remembering what this uniform stands for." The room fell silent. Even Morrison looked at her, with something between pride and fear. After a long pause, the presiding officer finally said, "You realize this will end your advancement opportunities." She nodded once, understood. He stared at her, then exhaled, dismissed. Outside in the hallway, Morrison caught up to her. "Damn it, Evelyn," he muttered. "You just walked away from a promotion." "I didn't walk away from anything," she said quietly. "I stayed where I'm supposed to." He looked at her for a moment, then smiled wearily. "You really are impossible. Someone has to be." He laughed softly. "You know, the funny part is they'll study your defiance one day, probably turn it into a leadership seminar." She smirked. "Let's hope they pay attention to the right parts." That night, she returned to the empty range one last time. The air smelled of rain and gun oil. She laid the M24 on the bench, opened the bolt, and stared down the barrel's smooth reflection. It wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was a journal written in sound, every shot a sentence, every miss a lesson. She picked it up, took position, and whispered, "This one's not for score." The shot echoed softly, vanishing into the night. For a moment she closed her eyes, letting the silence fill her lungs. No applause. No reprimand. Just peace. The next morning, a memo circulated quietly through the chain of command. Directive Gideon suspended indefinitely, pending ethical review. No one said why. No one mentioned her name. But Morrison knew. He called her into his office. "They backed off," he said simply. Evelyn only nodded. "You realize," he added, "you probably just saved the army from crossing a line we couldn't return from." She shrugged lightly. "One less target to hit, sir." Morrison smiled faintly, still using humor as armor, huh? Always works. That evening, alone again on the range, Evelyn sat watching the sunset fade behind the trees. She thought about everything she'd done, the students, the doctrine, the letters, the choices. It struck her how little of her life had been defined by pulling the trigger, and how much by deciding when not to. Maybe that was the truest mark of a sniper. Not precision of aim, but precision of judgment. The wind brushed past her hair, carrying the faint smell of cordite and rain. She whispered softly to no one, "Sometimes the bravest shot is the one you never take." And in that quiet she felt at peace, fragile but real. Because dignity, she knew, wasn't measured by medals or rank. It was measured by the moments you refused to trade your soul for victory. Why do the ghosts always come back when things finally quiet down? For the first time in years, Evelyn Jackson wasn't fighting the system or rewriting doctrine. She was teaching again, just teaching. The new class was her largest yet, 40 recruits drawn from across all branches. Half were men, half were women. For once, no one seemed to care about the difference. It was proof that change, though slow, had finally taken root. She'd shaped a generation of shooters who no longer laughed when a woman picked up an M24. They didn't ask if she belonged. They asked how she breathed before firing. But peace never stays long for soldiers. It waits, lets you exhale, then reminds you what it costs. The first weeks passed in calm repetition. Dawn drills, physics lectures, the sharp rhythm of boots on gravel. Her students called her ma'am with quiet respect. They knew her legend, but they'd also heard the rumors about the ethics board, about the classified program she'd refused. To them, she wasn't just an instructor. She was proof that conviction still meant something in a uniform. One afternoon, after class dismissed, a young lieutenant named Harris lingered behind. He was tall, sharp-eyed, and talented, the kind of shooter whose instincts seemed born, not taught. "Ma'am," he said, "I was reading about Operation Gideon last night." Evelyn froze for a fraction of a second. "Officially, that program never existed," she said evenly. He nodded. "Still, people say you killed it." She looked at him. "If I did, it's because some things aren't meant to live." He hesitated. "My father served in Delta. He used to say restraint gets people killed." "Your father's not wrong," Evelyn said quietly. "But he's not entirely right either. Restraint doesn't mean hesitation, it means control. Learn the difference and you'll live longer." She started to walk away, then stopped. "Lieutenant, remember something. Sometimes walking away from a bad shot is the best shot you'll ever make." Harris nodded, thoughtful. That night she dreamed again. The rooftop, the radio, the explosion. The flash of a child's face. She woke in darkness, drenched in sweat, hands trembling as if the rifle were still there. The clock read 02:17. She sat on the edge of the bed, breathing through it. 11 years since that mission, and still the same nightmare. Evelyn stood, poured water from the canteen on her desk, and stared out the window toward the range, ghostly under the floodlights. In the distance, the silhouettes of targets stood in neat rows like graves. She whispered, "Still here, huh?" No answer, just wind moving through pine. The next morning she put on her instructor face, calm, steady, unbreakable. But Morrison noticed the change. He found her in the corridor after class. "You look tired," he said. She gave a small smile. "Been having conversations with old ghosts." "Tell them they're dismissed," he said softly. "I've tried, they don't listen." He sighed. "You ever talk to the chaplain?" "I talk to rifles, sir. They're quieter." He smiled. "That's the problem." Week 6 brought the live field exercise, simulated urban sniping under stress. The students moved in two-man teams through a mock village, engaging pop-up targets under time pressure. Evelyn monitored from the control tower, headphones on, eyes tracking through multiple camera feeds. Harris's team led the pack, smooth, disciplined, textbook perfect. She felt proud watching him work. He reminded her of herself at that age, before politics, before ghosts. Then mid-exercise, static crackled in her headset. "Control, this is Team 7, a possible civilian in zone." Evelyn frowned. "Repeat, Team 7. Movement near Building 4, can't confirm." "Hold position. Do not engage," she ordered. Seconds later, crack. Her heart stopped. "Team 7, report." Silence. Then a voice shaky. "Target neutralized, ma'am. False alarm, it was one of our spotters." Evelyn closed her eyes. No one died. The spotter was wearing body armor, part of the safety staff. But the shot had been real, and the mistake unforgivable. After the debrief, the shooter, a nervous corporal, stood before her, pale and trembling. "I thought he moved wrong, I just—" Evelyn raised a hand. "Stop." Her voice was calm, but her pulse thundered. "You thought, you assumed, you fired." Tears filled his eyes. "Ma'am, You violated the first principle," she said quietly. "Positive identification before engagement, always." He nodded, broken. She dismissed him and turned away, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Because in that corporal's mistake, she saw herself. Same confusion, same split-second decision. Same ghost waiting at the other end. That night she walked the range again, unable to sleep. The wind smelled like gun oil and regret. She sat on the bench, staring at the dark targets. Footsteps approached softly behind her. Couldn't sleep either, Morrison's voice. She didn't turn. How'd you know I'd be here? Where else would you go? He sat beside her. For a long time neither spoke. Finally, she said, he pulled the trigger because he panicked, because he thought he had to shoot. I trained him better than that. Morrison shook his head. You trained him to decide. That's all you can do. It's not enough. It never is. The wind picked up, whispering through the grass. After a moment, Morrison added softly, You ever think maybe you hold yourself to impossible standards? Evelyn smiled faintly, only on days that end with a Y. 2 weeks later, she called an unscheduled class meeting. The recruits gathered on the range, expecting another lecture on ballistics. Instead, she stood before them without her rifle. Something happened during the last exercise, she began. A mistake, a serious one, but we're not here to assign blame. We're here to understand why it happened. She looked at Harris, then at the others. When you hold this, she said, raising an empty hand as if the rifle were there, you hold authority, the power to take life, the power to save it. And if you ever start thinking those are the same thing, you've already lost. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. Every time you fire, you're writing something permanent into the world. That permanence should scare you. It scares me. It should. Silence. Even the wind seemed to still. Then Harris spoke quietly. Ma'am, have you ever made that kind of mistake? She met his eyes. Yes. The admission rippled through the group. What did you do? He asked. I learned to live with it, by making sure no one else repeats it. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Harris saluted, slow and deliberate. One by one, the rest followed. Not for rank, for truth. Later that evening, she found a note taped to her door. No signature. Just one line, written in a student's careful hand. We don't shoot for perfection, ma'am. We shoot for accountability. You taught us that. She folded the paper and slipped it into her notebook beside Cooper's letters. 3 pieces of paper, different years, different hands. But together, they told her everything she needed to know. Her legacy wasn't the doctrine. It was the conscience it carried. That night she dreamed again. Same rooftop. Same radio. Same face. But this time, when she raised the rifle, she didn't pull the trigger. The dream faded, not with an explosion but with silence. And for the first time in over a decade, she woke up without shaking. The following morning, she arrived at the range early. The sky was still gray, the world half asleep. She set the rifle down gently and took a breath. For a long time she didn't fire. She just watched the horizon slowly catch light. Then she whispered, "All right, old friend, let's start again." 1 shot. Steady, clean center. Not for record. Not for validation. For peace. She smiled, almost laughing through the breath that followed. It wasn't victory. It was forgiveness. Because maybe that's all survival really is. Learning to forgive the versions of yourself that didn't know better yet. And teaching others so they never have to meet that version. How do you know when it's really over? When the war stops being out there and comes home. For Master Sergeant Evelyn Jackson, it began like any other Tuesday. The Georgia air was heavy with late summer heat, the sound of gunfire rhythmic on the range behind headquarters. She was reviewing student evaluations when the base alarm tore through the quiet. 3 short bursts, then 1 long wail. Active shooter alert. Every instinct in her body snapped awake. Within seconds she was out the door, boots hitting concrete, heart pounding a rhythm she hadn't felt since deployment. Over the loudspeaker, Barracks C building lockdown, armed individual, hostages confirmed. Her students, many only weeks into training, were inside that building. Security forces scrambled across the compound. Sirens flashed. Radios hissed fragments of chaos. Evelyn reached the perimeter, scanning for the on-scene commander. "Report," she barked. Captain Lowe turned toward her, pale and sweating. One of the trainees, Lieutenant Harris, took a rifle from the armory during maintenance rotation. He's barricaded in the classroom with 4 students. Claims he'll prove something. Evelyn's chest tightened. Harris, her best shot, the one who'd asked about restraint. What's he demanding? No demands, no contact. He's just sitting there by the window. Anyone who moves, he threatens. She looked toward the building. Second-floor windows dark behind drawn blinds. How long since last visual? 7 minutes. Evelyn swallowed hard. Then we don't have time to wait. The tactical team was setting up perimeter positions when she approached the command post. "I trained him," she said quietly. "He'll talk to me." Lowe shook his head. "You're not on the crisis list." "You think protocol, going to reach him faster than I can." He hesitated. She stepped closer. "If he sees anyone else in armor, he'll think it's a trap. I can calm him down. Let me try." Lowe exhaled. "You go in unarmed." She nodded once. A soldier handed her a vest. She waved it off. "He knows I don't wear one on the range. Keep it consistent." The man started to protest, but her expression ended it. She walked toward the barracks door, palms open, voice low. "Harris, it's Jackson. I'm coming in." Silence. Then a muffled voice, "Stay back." She paused just outside the entrance. "I'm not armed, you know that. I just want to talk." Another pause, then. Doors unlocked. The hallway smelled of oil and cordite. The lights flickered, emergency mode. Evelyn moved slowly, hands visible. "Harris," she called softly, "it's just me." He stepped out from the classroom doorway, rifle trembling in his grip. His eyes were wild, rimmed red from tears. "Ma'am," he stammered, "I didn't mean they wouldn't listen. They said restraint gets you killed." Evelyn's heart broke at the words. "Put the rifle down, son." He shook his head violently. "You said control matters. I'm showing them. I'm in control." "No," she said gently, taking one small step forward. "Control isn't holding a weapon. It's knowing when to let it go." His breathing hitched. "They laughed at me, said I was soft, said your methods make us weak." "And what do you think?" she asked. He blinked hard. "I don't know anymore." "Then trust what you do know," she said. "That weapon's not strength, it's noise. You don't need noise to be heard." He looked down at the rifle. His knuckles whitened. Through the cracked door behind him, she saw the hostages, terrified but unhurt. One twitch could end everything. She steadied her breath, matching his chaos with calm. "Harris," she whispered, "look at me. You think I haven't stood where you're standing. You think I haven't heard the voices that tell you you're losing control." He swallowed hard. "You." She nodded. "Every night for years." He frowned, confused. "The ghosts don't go away," she said. "They just learn to listen when you start talking back." Tears spilled down his cheeks. "I can't. I thought I was doing the right thing." "You still can," she said, "right now." Outside, she could hear faint radio chatter, security teams repositioning. She raised one hand subtly to signal them to hold. Then she took another slow step. "Let me have it," she whispered. "You don't need it anymore." Harris's arms trembled. The muzzle dipped. For a heartbeat, Evelyn thought he'd hand it over. Then a noise outside, a radio crackle, made him jerk. The rifle swung up, instinct not intent. Evelyn moved without thought. Her hand closed over the barrel, pushing it skyward as it fired. The sound was deafening in the narrow hall. They froze, smoke drifted between them. Her voice stayed calm. "It's okay, nobody's hurt, just breathe." His grip loosened. The rifle slipped from his hands, clattering to the floor. She kicked it aside gently, then pulled him into her arms as he sobbed against her shoulder. "It's over," she murmured. "You're all right." Outside, the security team stormed in, weapons raised, then halted at her signal. Evelyn nodded once. "He's done." Hours later, after statements and reports, she sat alone in the medical bay where Harris was being evaluated. The doctor nodded to her. "He's stable. Shock, exhaustion, possible PTSD onset, nothing physical." "Can I see him?" "Briefly." Inside, Harris sat on the cot, staring at his hands. When he saw her, his eyes filled again. "Ma'am, I almost—" Evelyn cut him off softly. "You didn't, that's what matters." He shook his head. "I failed you." "No," she said, voice steady. "You reminded me why this training exists, why restraint isn't weakness, it's survival." He looked at her, broken. "They're going to discharge me, aren't they?" "Maybe," she said honestly, "but that's not the end. What happens next is up to you. Heal first, learn again, then teach someone what you learned today." He nodded, silent tears slipping down his face. Before she left, he whispered, "Why did you come in unarmed?" She smiled faintly. "Because you wouldn't have recognized me otherwise." Later that night, Morrison found her sitting on the hood of her truck, watching the blue lights fade across the base. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her. Finally he asked, "You all right?" Evelyn nodded. "He's alive. They're all alive. That's enough." Morrison exhaled. "You know the review board will want a full report." "I already wrote it," she said. "Title line reads, 'The shot not taken.'" He chuckled softly. "You and your poetry." She smiled. "I figured they'd expect something dramatic." Then her face grew serious. "He almost killed his classmates, sir, but he's not a monster. He's a soldier who broke under pressure we created." Morrison nodded grimly. "You think this is on us?" "I know it is," she said. "We train them to aim for perfection but never teach them how to miss and recover. We tell them to control fear but never how to face it. Harris isn't the first. He just survived it." He looked at her for a long time, then said, "You're right, so what do we do?" She stared out across the silent range. "We start adding a new module to every sniper course: psychological resilience, emotional decompression, mental reset. No one leaves my program until they learn how to put the rifle down." Morrison smiled faintly. "Consider it approved." Before dawn, she walked the range alone. The dew sparkled on steel targets like tears caught in sunlight. She placed her hand on the cold barrel of the M24, whispering, "You don't get to win today." Then she set the rifle back in its case and locked it. For the first time in her career, she left the range without firing a single shot. It felt strange, lighter somehow. As the sun rose, she realized something. Every lesson, every defiance, every moment of silence, all of it had led to this. Not to another record or medal, but to mercy. She taught the world how to shoot. Now maybe she could teach it how to stop. That afternoon, she met with the new class, the next generation already forming lines on the range. They expected drills, orders, the usual. Instead, Evelyn spoke quietly. "Yesterday something happened on base. You'll hear rumors, some true, some not, but here, what matters? A soldier lost control because he thought control meant dominance. It doesn't, it means responsibility." Her gaze swept across the young faces before her. "You'll all hold a rifle soon. Remember, it's not just a weapon, it's a choice. And every choice you make will echo louder than the shot itself." She paused, then added softly, "The most accurate shot is the one guided by conscience." The range stayed silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly one of the recruits raised his hand. "Ma'am, if control means responsibility, what does mastery mean?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Mastery," she said, "means knowing when to walk away." When do you know it's time to put the rifle down for good? Maybe it isn't when your aim falters, but when you realize you don't need to prove it anymore. Months passed after the Harris incident. The investigation came and went, quiet as a shadow. No public hearings, no reprimands, just whispered acknowledgments that she had saved lives again. But Evelyn didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired. The kind of tired that didn't live in her muscles anymore, but in her soul. Her days continued with the same rhythm: morning drills, lectures, range checks. But something had shifted. The students noticed it first. She no longer barked orders. She spoke softly, thoughtfully, as if measuring each word. During breaks, they'd see her sitting by the fence line, staring at the horizon, her fingers brushing the worn strap of the M24 like it was an old friend she wasn't sure she'd ever see again. Morrison noticed too. He didn't ask questions. He'd been in this life long enough to recognize the signs. Every soldier, if they live long enough, reaches that invisible line, the one between service and surrender. And if they're lucky, they recognize it before it's crossed. One evening, as the sun set over the range, Evelyn gathered her class for what she told them would be the final lesson. They assumed she meant the semester's end. They didn't know she meant hers. She stood before them in the long amber light, M24 cradled in her hands. "I've taught you how to fire, how to breathe, how to wait." She paused, eyes steady. "But none of that matters if you forget what this weapon truly is." She tapped the rifle lightly. "It's a mirror. It reflects who you are in the moment you pull the trigger. Fear shows, rage shows, mercy shows. You can't hide behind distance. The scope doesn't protect you, it exposes you." Her voice softened. "Some of you will serve in places where choices come fast. You'll make them right or you'll live with them wrong. Either way, you'll carry the echo. Don't let it define you. Let it teach you." She looked out across their faces, young, strong, hopeful. A reflection of who she'd once been. "Remember," she said, "your legacy isn't built by the shots you take. It's built by the ones you choose not to." For a long moment, silence hung in the air, heavy, reverent. Then she smiled faintly. "That's all I have to teach." After class, she walked the line of targets one last time. The air was cooling. The sky had turned lavender. At lane 7, she stopped. Her favorite spot, the one where she'd fired her first perfect grouping years ago. She set the M24 on its rest and looked through the scope, not to shoot, but just to see. Through the crosshairs, she watched the world drift in the soft evening light. The field, the tree line, the wind bending grass like waves on an unseen ocean. She whispered quietly, "You've done your job, old friend." And for the first time, she didn't squeeze the trigger. She simply lowered the rifle, unloaded it, and placed it back in its case. The sound of the latch closing felt final. A few days later, Morrison called her into his office. He didn't need to ask, he already knew. "You're retiring," he said softly. She nodded, "It's time." He leaned back, exhaling. "You sure we could use you another year, maybe two?" Evelyn smiled. "That's the thing about knowing when to stop, sir. You have to do it before they start saying, 'We could use you another year.'" He laughed quietly. "You always did have a sense for timing." They sat in silence for a moment, two soldiers who'd seen too much, said too little, and somehow survived it all. Finally, Morrison asked, "What do you do now?" Evelyn thought for a moment. Maybe right, not a manual, just thoughts. Things no one teaches in boot camp, like how to breathe again when the shooting stops. He smiled. "That's worth more than all the doctrines in the world." She rose to leave, then hesitated. "Sir, thank you for never making me choose between orders and conscience." He stood and extended his hand. "No," he said softly. "Thank you for reminding the rest of us that conscience still belongs in uniform." Their handshake lasted longer than regulation allowed. That weekend, she packed her small quarters, neatly, methodically, the way soldiers do. Every medal went into a wooden box. Every photo was wrapped in cloth. But when she reached the case holding her rifle, she paused. Her reflection stared back from the polished metal of the barrel. Gray in her hair now, lines around her eyes. She lifted the weapon gently, ran her thumb along the serial number. Then she pulled a folded paper from her pocket, the letter from Harris. It read simply, "I'm getting better, still hearing the echoes, but they're quieter now. Thank you for teaching me to listen instead of fight them." She smiled. Without thinking, she slipped the letter into the rifle case before closing it. One student's redemption, tucked beside the weapon that once defined her. The day she left the base, dawn was just breaking, the same color of sky she'd trained under for decades. She loaded her truck with 2 duffel bags, the wooden box of medals and nothing else. Before driving away, she stopped by the range one last time. It was empty, silent except for the soft rustle of wind through grass. She walked to the firing line, placed her hand on the weathered wood bench and whispered, "Thank you." No salute, no ceremony, just that word. Then she turned and walked away. Weeks later, a new instructor took over the program. First day on the job, he found an envelope taped to the inside of the range safe. On it, a simple note. "For whoever takes my place, the weapon you hold is not power, it's responsibility. Teach them that first and everything else will follow. EJ." He framed it above the classroom door. Years later, recruits still pointed to it before every live-fire test. They didn't know her story in detail. But they knew the legend, the sniper who never missed, and who taught them that sometimes victory wasn't about aim at all. Evelyn settled in a quiet cabin on the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains. No neighbors, no noise, just the slow rhythm of wind and the distant call of hawks. She still woke early, out of habit, still brewed her coffee like it was a pre-mission ritual. But now, instead of loading rifles, she loaded pages. Each morning she wrote reflections, memories, lessons. Not for fame, not for publication, just for peace. Her notebook filled with lines like, "We train to eliminate threats, but no one trains us to face the silence after they're gone." And, "Maybe we measure courage wrong. Maybe it's not pulling the trigger but knowing when not to." She didn't call it a memoir. She called it the long breath. One morning, she received a letter addressed with shaky handwriting. It was from Harris. He was teaching now civilian marksmanship courses for veterans recovering from trauma. His words were simple. "I use your lessons every day. I teach them how to breathe, how to pause. You didn't just save us. You changed what it means to hold a rifle." Evelyn read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it beside her coffee mug. Outside, sunlight spilled over the mountains. She sat on the porch, closed her eyes, and let the warmth touch her face. For once there was no ghost, no order, no echo. Just the quiet rhythm of a heart that had finally stopped marching. Years later, when news came that Master Sergeant Evelyn Jackson had passed peacefully in her sleep, the sniper school lowered its flag for one day. No speeches, no salutes. Just a single shot fired into the air, not in mourning but in gratitude. The instructor who fired it whispered before pulling the trigger, "This one's for the lesson we all remember, the one you never wrote down." And maybe that was the truest end. Not medals, not headlines, just the invisible ripple left by a life that chose restraint over glory. Because in the end, Evelyn Jackson didn't just teach soldiers how to shoot. She taught them something far rarer, how to stay human while doing it. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.